Welcome to our second Leading Library Lecture Series of 2022, entitled Women's History Project, A Personal Perspective. Tonight, we'll hear from Councilor Hyzy about the importance of women in Milwaukie and world-renowned anthropologist Dr. Emilia Gonzalez on her journey of creating the Women's History Project for the Milwaukie Museum archives. Also, we'll feature 4 women of Milwaukie importance and character: Carolyn Tomei, Nancy Wittig, Elizabeth Chin Start, and Enid Briggs. Not from their mouths, as history will record their accolades and accomplishments, but from the mouths of those whom knew them best. Our speakers, Dave Tyler, Joe Sandfort, Lisa LeDoux, and Linda Carr, will tell the stories of experience and laurels that make Miss Tomei, Miss Wittig, Miss Start, and Miss Briggs great women, true heroes, and role models to all of Milwaukie residents. Thank you in advance for tuning in. A special thank you to Scott Stauffer and all the City of Milwaukie staff for allowing us to conduct our lecture inside the beautiful City Hall Council chambers. Slide. My name is Greg Hemer, the Communications Director of Milwaukie Historical Society, the owners and operators of the world's largest museum dedicated to the history of Milwaukie, Oregon, the Milwaukie Museum, located at 3737 Southeast Adams Street, open Saturdays 1 to 5 p.m. Yes, we have a museum, that one building you've been driving by for 15 years and have yet never stopped in. Trust me, it is well worth your time to visit to learn more about our historical past from all perspectives. Milwaukie Museum prides itself in telling stories as the past is the past, no matter if it's good, bad, or ugly. We work with organizations like Oregon Black Pioneers, Clackamas County Heritage Council, Japanese American Museum of Oregon, and the Grand Ron to expand our knowledge and tell the histories of all people that have lived in the area we call Milwaukie today. Our membership dollars pay for the operations of the museum, making it mission-free, removing barriers of income inequality for all those who want to learn about a great city of Milwaukie. Slide. Although 2021 was challenging, we were allowed to open our doors again in June and held 3 free performances at the museum featuring kid-friendly performers, bringing in over 300 visitors. We also published Ardenwald Adventures on our website, updated our technology, and held 4 Leading Library Lecture Series. Slide. 2022 will be even better. With COVID maybe in our rearview mirror, we will continue our performances at the museum with 4 shows, continuing our Leading Library Lecture Series, and hold a historic home tour in the historic and Lake Road NDAs. We are also creating a new exhibit and book entitled Then and Now, featuring stories and pictures of the past, comparing them to today. We are excited to be back and open to the public and contributing to local events like First Friday and the Farmers Market once we are allowed. Slide. Speaking of our Leading Library Lecture Series, Milwaukie Museum, along with our partners City of Milwaukie, Leading Library, and Willamette Falls Studios, are proud to present the 3rd Leading Library Lecture Series this year, entitled Milwaukie Historic Homes, A Guide and Tour Towards Preservation, June 1st, starting at 6:30 p.m. Join us for a discussion on Milwaukee's historic properties, learn from experts on how to and the meaning of preserving historic homes, and gain knowledge from specialists on how to research your own home's history. As of now, we expect this to be filmed, aired live, and presented to a live audience inside Milwaukee's Leading Library. As we have all learned over the last couple of years, things can change rapidly, so please, to learn more, check Milwaukie History Museum Facebook page or visit the Leading Library for more details. This will also kickstart off our historic home tour in the Lake Road and historic Milwaukie neighborhoods in August. Our 2 anchors are the Streeb House and Hager Pond. both impressive and have a great and interesting historic past. Look for the announcement on how to buy tickets during the June program. Slack. Milwaukie Museum is funded through donations and membership. Consider becoming a member today. For an individual is only $20 and for a business $100. By becoming a member, you will receive information about upcoming events, member-only gatherings, and the opportunities the museum can offer you. A business membership provides advertising on all of our literature and provides opportunities for museum involvement in your events. Either way you become a member, your dollars will help ensure that you are preserving Milwaukee's history for future generations, and you are contributing to wonderful programming like tonight's presentation. Check out our website at www.milwaukeemuseum.com to join or stop in the museum. Slide. Councilor Hyzy was elected to the council in November 18th. Prior to her election, she served on the city's Climate Action Plan Committee, CAPC. During her service on the CAPC, she saw how Milwaukee citizens, businesses, and city government can do work together to develop a way forward through difficult problems. She was a voice for developing strong, measurable goals for the Climate Action Plan and for identifying ways Milwaukeeans can feel empowered to speak up and actively engage with the problems of climate change. She brings this same focus on both the practical and the visionary, a deep appreciation for Milwaukee's love of community participation to her role as a councilor. Councilor Hyzy and I have had many interactions. The one thing that I have always appreciated about her is her ability to let people be people. Many times we listen to politicians, but do they listen to you? I remember when at a party for Wilda's 80th birthday party, myself and other Milwaukie residents were talking about density. Once again, the good, the bad, the ugly. The discussion centered around all three of these options. Councilor Hyzy listened, deliberated her opinion, and then smiled. An hour later, even though her deliberation was not the same as my opinion, we laughed and talked as we both headed for home. It is a wonderful trait that Councilor Hyzy remembers that discussions are discussions, but friendships are so much more important. Councilor Hyzy, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Greg. I recommend to you all, if you ever need to have an introduction written, ask Greg if he's busy, because he really makes you sound like a really great person. Thank you for the opportunity to be here tonight, and to the Milwaukie Historical Museum for all the work they do to just continue to build up the identity of Milwaukie as a community. It's important for us to know our history and to stay rooted in it as we keep building toward our future. So they do great work, they do it on a shoestring, and they just bring joy to us in many different ways. So I wanted to thank you all for being here, in person or virtually, and to joining us to celebrate Women's History Month. And I wanted to start this off really with a lesson that I learned from my fellow counselor, Desi Nicodemus, when he was introducing Black History Month last month. And he really insisted that it be about Black excellence. And we have the same opportunity here tonight. Black history is about so much more than the past, and about so much more than the kinds of achievements we think of as historic. And the exact same thing is true of women here in Milwaukie, across the globe, everywhere. So tonight, let's celebrate. Let's celebrate the 4 women that we have in front of us tonight. Let's celebrate this bigger project to learn about oral histories and the oral histories of the amazing women that we've seen in this community throughout time. The excellence of Milwaukee's women is evident everywhere in our community. We thank Florence Ledding for the gift of our library. Everywhere you look in our city government, from our city manager on down, you see dedicated, brilliant women who are giving their all to this community. Our city council has been majority women for over 7 years, and I'm probably getting that number wrong, and Scott is mentally correcting me in this very instance. Unfortunately, that's still unusual. It's still noteworthy, both of those things. Seeing so many women in leadership positions, either elected or as staff, isn't the norm, and we should change that. Women are also leading the way through service in our many city boards and commissions, and as volunteers in way too many capacities for me to list here tonight. I thank each and every one of those women. But women's excellence in Milwaukie also looks a whole lot different in a whole lot of different ways. It looks like the single parent mothers who are working 2 jobs and sleeping in their car where their children are couch surfing with friends. It looks like a championship-winning girls basketball team. It looks like the daughter who provides in-home care for her aging parents. Women's excellence truly wears thousands of faces in our community, every one of them different and every one of them worthy. I hope you take a moment tonight to really look at the women in your life, to look at what they're doing, to look at how they're showing up, and to see the work they're doing to make ends meet, to fulfill their potential, to fulfill the potential of this community, and to push past the limitations of sexism, racism, homophobia, all of the isms that so many women continue to struggle with daily. Take a look at all of that and thank them. And let's thank each other too. The women whose stories we are hearing tonight are all inspiring, wonderful women. I'm lucky to personally know both Carolyn and Elizabeth, and after learning more about Enid at our council meeting last night, I know without a doubt we would have been good friends. And as a frequent visitor to our library, I know Nancy's lifelong service there continues to enrich our lives every day. I look forward to hearing more of these stories tonight. Thank you.
One of our partners in programming tonight is the City of Milwaukie. City of Milwaukie boards and committees are accepting applications. Apply now. The city is now accepting applications for all boards and committee positions. Now is your chance to engage your community and participate in the work of the city. From the Arts Committee to the Tree Board, there are many interest areas and projects and programs to get involved with the city's volunteer boards and committees. Apply online by visiting at www.milwaukieoregon.com/BC. Applications will be accepted until mid-May, interviews will be held in May, and appointments for open positions will be made in June. Applications will not be accepted after May 16th, so get them in as soon as possible. Contact the city recorder at orc@milwaukieoregon.gov with any questions. As being on a city board or commission myself for over 15 years straight now, I can speak from experience. The feeling of being a difference maker is not only rewarding, but also satisfying. Allow your voice, your opinions, and your perspectives be heard by serving on a board or a committee. Slide. Dr. Emilia Gonzalez Clement's professional experience began in social work in 1975 in community outreach, foster care and adoption, and supervising an emergency shelter for children from birth to age 18. Her last social work position involved working with battered women and diversity training for staff. She shifted to applied anthropology after her master's degree. Now, for those of you that are just confused as I am, I will explain this. Anthropology is the comparative study of cultures over time and space. Applied anthropology is the use of anthropology perspectives and methods to help solve contemporary human problems. She has completed over 100 applied projects in the continental United States, Mexico, Nicaragua, Peru, Bangladesh, Hawaii, Belize, the Dominican Republic, and even here in Oregon. Projects include working with Indian tribes, environmental organizations, state agencies, universities, and communities in strategic planning, needs assessment, social change initiatives, cultural diversity training, public participation initiatives, cultural documentation, community-based planning, and renewable resource assessments. Dr. Gonzalez Clements was a visiting associate professor of anthropology at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, developing and teaching 7 courses, including anthropology of gender, directing 11 independent study students, and teaching 3 ethnographic field schools in rural northern Mexico. Some of the courses were cross-listed with women's studies. Her work on women's issues includes serving as executive director of the Lincoln-Lancaster Commission on the Status of Women and teaching applied anthropology, including the anthropology of gender, at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. Her international work centered on women's roles in development planning and participation. She co-founded the Nebraska Women of Color Network, which held a networking and training conference annually. In 1995, Dr. Gonzalez Clements coordinated Nebraska's participation for the regional preparatory meeting for the United Nations 4th World Conference for Women, working with the University of Nebraska Women's Center. She then attended the NGO Forum as a delegate from the UNA USA Lincoln Chapter 100 in China, presenting and training seminar and the regional meeting information. Dr. Gonzalez Clements' service to her discipline, including service as chair of the Public Policy Committee of the Society for Applied Anthropology and as president of the High Plains Society for Applied Anthropology. She co-founded a local practitioner organization in the Pacific Northwest. She has worked extensively mentoring and training undergraduate, graduate, and volunteer interns. Her fellow researcher and partner in Milwaukie Women's History Project is her granddaughter, Stella Tompkins. Ms. Tompkins received her Bachelor of Arts from Smith College, where she majored in government and minored in economics with coursework in economic development, macroeconomics, econometrics, and urban economics. She has previously worked as a field organizer for a congressional campaign and a development intern for court-appointed special associates here in Portland, Oregon. Ms. Tompkins currently works in community development finance, where she services loans for borrowers across the country that develop and operate affordable housing, charter schools, and other community facilities. She also assists her organization with grant applications, data management, and compliance for various federal programs. Impressive, right? I cannot remember how, why, or even when Emilia and her granddaughter Stella walked through the Milwaukie Museum doors. But I do remember Emilia saying her and Stella wanted to do a project together, and we would like to do a Milwaukie Women's History Project. Dave Aschenbrenner, the Milwaukie Historical Society president, and I looked at each other and said, it doesn't seem like it's going to cost the museum any money, so why not? What we didn't know is about Emilia's and Stella's expertise, accomplishments, accolades, experience, and education. We did not know that she was the Nebraska Hispanic Woman of the Year, something she did not put in her bio, but the internet does know. We as a society are so grateful for her and Stella beginning, forming, working, and finalizing the project. Thank you so much, Dr. Gonzalez Clements and Ms. Tompkins, for everything. It is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Emilia Gonzalez Clements and Stella Tompkins.
Slide, please. Good evening, and thank you for being here both in person and virtually. I'm Stella Tompkins, a lending associate with Partners for the Common Good in Washington, D.C. And as you just heard, my grandmother is a doctor of applied anthropology, and you'll be hearing from her later in the presentation. Slide. Before we get started, we would like to dedicate the project in loving memory to 3 amazing Milwaukie women who were participants in the project and recently passed away: Adele Briggs Wilder, Betty Lou Beck, and Enid Briggs. slide, please. Tonight, the presentation is going to come in 3 parts. I will be going over the project in general. Dr. Clements will go over the research findings, and we'll sum everything together with the analysis and conclusions. The project overview is going to include an introduction. I'll go over the project deliverables that came out of the project, the archival materials that are available because of the project, and a plan for public access for the materials. Dr. Gonzalez will go over the different interesting facts that we came across throughout the process, participant profiles, quotes and comments from the interviews, a community history, as well as listing some women's contributions. At the end, we'll go over some patterns and trends that we noticed, women's roles, and we'll conclude with recommendations and next steps. Okay, so the purpose of the project was to document women's contributions to Milwaukie, but also create a community history from a women's perspective. The project consists of interviewing local women in business, politics, and just the community, and they were selected by the Milwaukie Historical Society Board. 12 of the 18 women who were selected agreed to participate. The goal of the project was to fill in a gap in the archives about the role of modern women in Milwaukie history from the period 1950 to 2015. The methodology we use to carry out the research includes oral history techniques and ethnographic research. We did this by conducting personal interviews with the participants, and we used a 70-item questionnaire. So the different deliverables that came out of the project include a narrative oral history book that will have life stories of the different participants, as well as that community history from the female perspective. There will also be data and materials for the museum to create displays well after this project is over. This could include making displays for the participants' profiles or putting together a women's history timeline with the materials we provided. The archival materials that are available include audio recordings, printed transcripts, and public access plan. Included in the questionnaire I mentioned, there were questions about the Historical Society and the museum, which is just good feedback for the museum going forward from these important women. Next slide. Okay, so from that 70 questionnaire, we have lots of different categories that we wanted to include to get a full picture of each of the participants. So the categories include just basic biographical information. We asked about their parents, grandparents, and we also asked about the first immigrant that came to the United States from their family. We also asked about the first contact they had with Milwaukie, whether that was them or a family member, so the first person to be in contact with the city. And we asked about their Milwaukie connection in the community. We also went through their personal history and what their life looks like today. We asked about their perspectives and or involvement in the women's movement. We also asked what they know and understand about early Milwaukie history and modern Milwaukie history. Then we got their perspectives on the history. We also asked about the Historical Society and the museum and what their comments and opinions were. And then we finished with just some more open-ended questions, if there was anything else that they would want us to know, and what they want people to remember about them, and what they want the public to know about Milwaukie. Next slide. So Emilia, Dr. Emilia, is going to come up and go through the findings of this process.
I'm so proud of her. Here are some interesting facts that don't have names associated with them, so that you'll have to read the book when it comes out, as they say. I'm sorry, I've been shuffling too much paper. Okay. And my thumb isn't working. Interesting facts. When we talk about ethnographic methods, we normally, anthropologists go to one culture for 1 year by yourself, and you learn the language, and you do everything people do, and you observe, and you ask, and they teach you. But these were educated women. They were activists. They were from every role you can imagine. So a questionnaire was the perfect way to take a couple of hours, and they could tell us so many things, and so that's the method we chose. So here's some of the things that you will read when you read the entire thing. Only 2 of the participants identified as feminists, which was the bias we had that we had to be careful not to present. There is a trailblazing politician who started out reactivating a neighborhood association to solve a problem in her community. Then she became a volunteer on the planning commission, and she was elected to city council, and then as mayor, and then served as a state legislator for 14 years. The quote that I've chosen for her life story is something like, "I knew nothing about planning, but I was an activist and knew how to make things happen." So we have a little quote like that from each person. The eldest participant, this is Enid Briggs, I will give you her name. She was a Civil Air Patrol cadet during World War II, searching the Columbia River for enemy submarines. And she still has all the paraphernalia. She became a very good friend of mine. One of the women was on the picket line at age 5 alongside her father, and she is an officer in a national labor union. That's a pretty wide gamut right there. Slide. So here's some really quickie quotes to give you a sense of who these women are. Jeanette Baker, mother, community activist, volunteer. Deborah Barnes, news broadcaster, teacher, mother, professor, union leader, politician. Nancy Bauer, mother, volunteer, artist, teacher, education activist, historian. Betty Lou Beck, mother, educator, volunteer. Siri Bernard, she has more jobs. Her quote is, "What job haven't I had?" So I picked a few that would fit on the page. Mortgage executive, leadership trainer, campaign manager, and volunteer. Enid Briggs, educator, coach, way back when. Church co-founder, historian, museum volunteer. Carlotta Collette, feminist, public involvement strategist, city and metro councilor. Peggy Costanzo, mother, tour organizer for the Portland Art Museum, accountant and volunteer. Wilda Parks, mother, Chamber of Commerce manager, mayor, volunteer, artist. Carolyn Tomei, mother, social worker, counselor, mayor, state legislator, volunteer, and there was not enough room on the page to add all the other things that go with her name. Adele Wilder, who is the sister of Enid Briggs. Mother, employee, volunteer, interim curator for the Milwaukie Museum. She said, "I had no idea what I was doing, but I had to keep it open." Nancy Wittig, mother, librarian at the heart of a bastion of the community, and that's from one of the board members, and volunteer. And now we get to some of the sad things that really gave us the impetus to keep going in spite of bad weather and everything else that was going on in my life. These are some quotes and comments from the women. "I was denied college because I was a girl. My parents said it was a waste of money." That woman went on to create, quote, "a very satisfying life," which included traveling around the U.S., teaching, and being a local activist for when her children were in school and so forth. Another quote, "It was the 70s. I couldn't get a credit card in my own name." I've been there. And then another one, speaking about 1970s, "We were expected to be subservient. We lost downtown, our gathering place, our community." And then referring to the question, were women active in the life of the community? This came up so many times. They were always working in the churches. They might not have been in public, but they were providing social services on their own through their churches and organizations. There was always a strong woman around. And then another one, "We have to speak out for ourselves. If we don't, who will? Women need to be in leadership positions setting policies." So those are just some of the comments. The the chapters in the book are divided by categories that the women naturally fell into. And for example, we had heritage keepers. Those are the Briggs sisters, because they literally worked so long and so hard for so many years in the museum, and then they did their own history. I was lucky to visit with Enid 3 or 4 times in the couple of months before she passed, and she shared with me a closet full of history of her family that goes to the 1600s. She said, history to me is not 20 years, it's 150. And you should see the stack of stuff, which she said she would give to the museum if you copied it. So we asked them to tell us about the history. We asked them a few questions like, and I'm not from Oregon, and I didn't really know the history, but I learned a few things, and I said, I understand that the early periods of Milwaukee history were, you know, the native inhabitants, and then there were explorers, and then there were trappers, and then I went on through the litany that you have in your official website. And they said, yes, that's right, that's as far, and the women that had not been here very long, they sort of knew that, they didn't have all the details, but what we wanted was to find out what did they think about the history of this community from their own perspective, because we kept hearing things like, oh, I don't think we've ever had a female mayor, even though we had one in the history, or I didn't know women could be politicians. And so there's a lot of comments strung through all of these stories. So we asked them to tell us about those early periods, if they knew about them. And then we asked them to tell us in general, from like the 1900s to 1950, what was going on in this community. And they answered that question. And then we asked them by decade. So what was happening in the 1950s, in the 60s, in the 80s, et cetera. And depending on how long the women had been here, their answers were either very thorough or they didn't know because they didn't show up for 30 years before the time period that we're talking about. So we asked them these categories in many different questions. Tell me about the community itself. And we kept hearing answers like all of the activities on Crystal Lake. For example, apparently dancing cheek to cheek was not allowed in Milwaukie, in Clackamas County back then, but it was in Multnomah County. So the Crystal Lake activity area extended between the boundary, and so everybody that wanted to dance cheek to cheek went to the Multnomah corner and danced there, and they could do that. And then I heard about things like, well, you know, down by Lake Road there used to be celery fields, and so we asked them just a lot of open-ended questions about anything they wanted to talk about by these decades. And then another category was great women, and it was a very simple question. Who are some of the great women from here? And we got a lot of names. Alice Royer, the development director, and then Pat Duval, former city recorder, are just 2 of maybe 12 women that were talked about, including the first engineer, the first attorney, even though they weren't in our time period. And then we asked about community-wide events and traditions. And here's something that came up so many times, even from the women who were not from here or raised here and came, you know, when they were 58, for example. Milwaukie Days, that's a huge thing. And one of the women used to run that event as part of her resume. And then the Winter Solstice Festival. People really talked about where they could get together because they had lost downtown, which was their gathering place. And they had literally no place to go. And that was one of the reasons the Winter Solstice Festival is still really important, is because you know people and you can meet them there. And then we asked about significant events. Now these are all just 2 answers out of pages. We have like 5 pages of different events and things. The loss of downtown, that was the major topic these women talked about. And then they talked about the 1962 flood. I'm sorry, I don't know that part of the history, so I can't relate it to anything else. But what we ended up with was a chart that shows in the 1950s, all this was going on. In the 60s, all this was going on. And that data will be given to, slide please, will be given to the museum and its staff to figure out how to put it into some sort of display. Now, the women's contributions, again, we have a long, long list, and they don't fit into neat categories. But one thing that was really outstanding to me was that their contributions, what they did because what they had foremost in their minds was on how to spend their time had to do with family, neighborhood, and community. Purposefully, they chose things to do that dealt with making it better for their families, making it better for their neighborhood, and keeping their community the way they liked it. Here's a quote from Enid. Enid Briggs emphasized the role women played in Milwaukee before they became active in politics. Women have always worked informally in groups in all the social institutions such as churches and schools and clubs through all the years to keep the community going. Deborah Barnes speaks of women in leadership roles, including political office. And then our analysis. The contributions either filled a need. For example, Betty Lou Beck said, my grandma, I'm sorry, I'm supposed to say grandmother. She does not call her grandma like we do in our family. It's grandmother, so that's important. She said, my grandmother could have used those Meals on Wheels people started talking about. So she joined the steering committee and literally created what we now know as the Milwaukie Center, which started out by providing Meals on Wheels to seniors. And now, as you know, it provides services for all kinds of people throughout the community. That was a need that they identified. Another one, fix a problem. This one is Carolyn Tomei. In her neighborhood, which she totally loved because she loves water skiing, wants to live near the river, and literally waited to buy a house on the river because she saw an airplane land on the river. And she said, any place that a plane can land in a river is where I want to live. And so they ended up, 2 houses actually, but they ended up on the river. And apparently they were going to expand a sewer treatment plant. Apparently the smell was already bad, and they were going to expand it. And she made the point, it isn't Milwaukie sewage, it's Happy Valley. It's all kinds of sewage coming into this community. And so she looked around to see what she could do about it, discovered that there had been neighborhood associations. She and 2 of her neighbors got together and activated their particular one. And then they went for quite a while dealing with all kinds of city officials, city organizations, city commissions, city this, city that, and in all of the neighborhoods. And they arranged to deal with that issue because they found a need and they wanted to keep their neighborhood in the best position that they could. Or they did it to preserve local history. I'll never forget sitting with Enid, where they used to live behind her niece's house. She and her sister shared one of those additional units. I forgot the initials, but and they had a huge, beautiful deck, and it was full of flowers. And Enid kept talking about the insects and the frogs and the birds because she had a thing for biology, and she taught that for a long time. Her sister loved the flowers, and so we sat there for hours and hours. I visited them over and over because they had so much to say. And they started collecting information on churches. Enid tells me she had a shed behind her house, 10 by 20, because she's very practical. It's 10 by 20, and it's full of Indian artifacts. And someday I'll give them to the museum. So they spend a lot of their own personal time preserving local history, and their mother was very active in the WCTU back in the day, and the 2 sisters took turns taking her all over the state for those meetings, and they just jotted down everything that they said and did. Next slide. Patterns and trends. Gets a little tricky here. I'm going to have to read this. It turns out that the reason women did certain things in certain ways at a certain time is because of how long they have been here. There were 2 born heres. Those are the Briggs sisters. And they have deep roots in this community because they're like multi-generational. They had 36 first cousins with whom to go ice skating on Kellogg Lake and on hay wagon rides. And there used to be so much snow. And they talked with such passion about the way their environment was back then. And Enid even gave me some poems that she'd written. It's really adorable. I will include that in the book. So the two that were born here, they preserved local history. That was one of their passions. And then we have the raised here's, an interesting group of women who were not born here, but most of them had some sort of family connection already. A family lived in Portland, or they lived somewhere else in Oregon. And they ended up coming to Milwaukie at about age 10, two of them. Two of them were here from age 2 and age 3. That's Peggy Costanzo, age 2, and Siri Bernard, age 3. And they talked about living in Mayberry. And one of them, Deborah Barnes, even said, even in city council meetings, we'd say things like Opeyville. We all remember those from those good old days. They talked about staying out until the sunset, free to roam everywhere. It was safe. Everybody knew them. And if you were misbehaving, your next door neighbor would tell your mom, and you know you're going to get it when you get home. But they talked about an idyllic kind of a childhood, which we all envy, actually. And they wanted to keep that feeling, and they wanted their kids to be able to do that. Each participant valued family, community, and volunteering. They acted to fill a need, fix a problem, or preserve local history. One of the ways they did it was through informal groups or through churches or organizations. Garden clubs seems to have been really, really important as a way for women to get things done. And when they joined the garden club, they stayed for bloody ever, always doing other things, including taking other women to other groups. So that, and I don't know a thing about the garden club, but it was a very important thing. Or through neighborhood associations. I've already told you the case study of Carolyn Tomei, who then ended up on the planning commission, where I think she served for like 7 years and was a chair for 3 years. She's the one that didn't know a thing about planning, but somehow managed to do all of that to take care of problems with, what is it, Elk Rock? Is that the name of the island there where kids used to party till 4 in the morning, and neighbors would call, and they would call the police, and the police would say, not our jurisdiction, call Portland. They'd call Portland, and Portland would say, we have nothing to do with that. They managed to somehow completely solve that problem. And so she got on the planning commission, and then she ran it for about 3 years, and then went on to local and state office. And then another important part of how women became activists in Milwaukie, and I don't have the background information for this, it's on our future research list, leadership schools. They were quoted fairly often. You know, we had this one and we had that one, and then we had another one, and now they have turned that, being in leadership schools, they have turned that into a network, quote, where we stand behind each other and support each other. And that's how some women are getting into politics as we speak. So another pattern that we identified was obviously the changing economy. You know, it used to be, back in the day, they talked about the shipbuilding, and then they talked about agriculture, and always the Bing cherry was created here. Everybody mentioned that. They also talked about the changing landscape. You know, all this used to be farms, or all this used to be just riverfront. And then we were first, but then something happened to the river, and Portland kind of became the big city. Nobody liked that. And the changing landscape. But that's just, you know, that doesn't really tell you that what they were getting at. What they were getting at was they have a tremendous, these women, a tremendous sense of place. They identify with small town, you know everybody, you can be safe. And there were many questions that I'm not even referring to. For example, what was it like being a woman in Milwaukie? It was safe. We could do pretty much anything. You knew everybody. You could go anywhere. Nobody told us we couldn't do anything. So the sense of place is very important, and that goes along with the loss of downtown. Next slide. This is a dummy sheet. This is one that's going to have to be filled in, and we'll have to do that talking with the museum people, because I'm not quite sure how they want this information presented, and it certainly doesn't fit on one slide. So what we're going to do is we've identified some of the major roles, wives and mothers. Every single participant made it a special point to say things like Jean Baker. The cookies at the PTA meeting are important. Everybody commented about women who choose to stay at home. It's not such a huge thing like, well, I'm a working mother and you're not. Something's wrong with you. No, they were saying, we're raising the next generation, and we can do that, and we will do that. So wives and mothers, and also one comment, I chuckled at it, and I can't remember who said it at the moment, but she said, behind every politically active man, there was a wife doing all the work so that he could do that. And they meant it literally, because back in the day, there used to be farms. Enid told me about her father, who was a carpenter, who had to, I don't know how he got there, but somehow he went to Portland to work, and then he'd come home one day a week. And her mother, in the meantime, would be running the farm, and they raised a lot of fruit. They had a prune dryer, and all that required time and energy and effort, not to mention she's also raising her kids and dealing with those 36 first cousins. So that's a huge category, and every woman valued it. Enid never married, but she had hundreds and hundreds of students whom she called her kids, and they kept in touch with her till the day she died. They would visit her, and she would go to an annual dinner, and they'd come and give her hugs and kisses. Everybody called her Briggs. She was Briggs to most of those kids. Community volunteers. There's not enough room in this entire presentation to list what these women have done as volunteers. Also paid workers, which is a transitional role, because back in the 50s, there were very few women working outside the home for pay, 9 to 5 kind of thing. Political trailblazers, advocates and activists, mentors and networkers, and also some of these first women that got into local politics served as inspiration for everybody else. And here's a second dummy sheet. Women's History Timeline. At the upper left-hand corner, you'll see these 3 little blurbs. Pioneer Village, 1850 to 1860, small town, 1893 to 1930, and suburb, 1950 to the present. That's from the web page of the Planning Commission, and it deals with literally the physical built environment of downtown Milwaukie, the building. But the timing and the phrases seem to be right for this project. And so it just so happens that our entire timeline falls into the suburb category. So these little columns represent the decades that we asked women about. And I've just picked a very few things. Raising the next generation, that's in bold because everybody said that. Keeping our communities strong, everybody emphasized that. The underlined things are some of the things that were going on. For example, the loss of the streetcar. That happened in 1958, but this is too small a chart to show you exactly when it happened. So this is going to need a lot of work to put it into something that is useful for the museum. But downtown, it was bustling. It was, everybody could go there. Going downtown meant downtown Milwaukie. And then there was a loss of downtown. And then there was library expansion. And then there's new families coming in. The loss of the streetcar. The Baker case in 1970. I had to read that thing 5 times to figure it out. But basically, Jean Baker and her husband lived in California. And everything got kind of overpopulated and congested where they lived. The air was foul, the noise was abysmal, there was pollution. Her kids didn't know where a carrot came from. And one day she said to her husband, "We've got to move. I can't raise our boys this way. They've got to know where their food comes from." And so through various connections, they ended up here in Milwaukie. And in her particular case, she lived next to the creek. I don't know which creek that is yet because, again, I don't know the names of the local place name. But apparently some developers were going to build a 102-unit apartment complex in that space. And she thought that wasn't right because it was an ecologically beautiful place. Her neighbors had almost like a park there. They kept it beautifully, and she didn't like the idea of having this massive complex, and it was literally in her backyard. So she looked into it and discovered that that wasn't allowed because the city plan, the comprehensive plan, allowed only X number of apartments, and this was like 2X. She said, that's not right. So it took her a while to learn enough about it, get some steam, find some people to work with her. And she got, apparently the case was very important locally and state level and even elsewhere. I even found something about United Nations when I did some research on it. The thrust of this case, which was settled by the Oregon Supreme Court, was that the comprehensive plan really is above the zoning ordinances. So they couldn't, a group of people couldn't just decide, well, we'll give them a zoning ordinance and they can build more apartments. And she said no. And apparently it was quite a thing, and she made a lot of enemies. So we go from Mayberry in the 50s to women not having credit or loans, women beginning to go back to go to work or to go to college, women getting into local politics. 224 was built, and according to Siri Bernard, if you look at the city, 224 bisects the city, and what you have left is 2 nice houses and a lot of single women living in small places, completely divided from the other side of Milwaukie. So, in bold at the bottom, action and advocacy is what the women were into at this point. And then they got to be in local politics and are now setting policy, as is shown by some of these other things like light rail. There's not enough time to tell you, but apparently it was quite a contentious issue. There's been quite a few contentious issues, and women have been there in the thick of it. The bottom part of this chart is just a brief beginning of what was going on in the U.S. We've got World War II with Enid Briggs out there checking for submarines in the river. Post-World War II with rationing, all the things that were going on. The women's movement, and then ... that will be filled in. In the global context, we're in the Cold War, then there's Vietnam, and then there's endless other things going on, so that we can figure out what was going on globally and how did that affect the women locally. So the next slide will show you some of our conclusions. Women have played many roles and shaped Milwaukee's history as wives and mothers, community volunteers, paid workers, elected officials, advocates and activists, trailblazers, mentors, and serving as inspiration. That was a value that a lot of women had. Well, if it hadn't been for Carolyn, I wouldn't have dared to do this. And so she was really pivotal for giving women the empowerment to be able to go and do their own thing. Their contributions include helping restore downtown Milwaukie, bringing light rail to the community, establishing community theater, that was Wilda Parks, and then working informally in groups and community organizations is a tried and true continuing method for effecting change. Every participant emphasized the important role of raising families. As they would say, if we don't raise these kids, there's not going to be a Milwaukie. Next slide. Recommendations include the women that were mentioned by the participants in a different project. Who are some of the great women from here? Present the data to the City of Milwaukie for consideration to add the official historical timeline once we get a handle on that. Consider conducting a focus group with participants for action ideas. That's my one plug for applied anthropology. You know, let's use this data to affect some social change if that's what the group wants to do. 4, send selected materials to the National Women's History Project, which is a repository for things that women have done over time. And all that means is that we would send the book, for example, or the history timeline or whatever, and it would be included in the national database if the museum board chooses to do that. And then create profiles and women's history timeline displays for the museum. Those are some of our recommendations. The next slide shows you the next steps. Stella and I will make a report to the board because while we're doing this project, Stella was learning project management, and so she will help me create the consultant's report to the board that explains everything in a nutshell in 3 pages, because boards don't read more than 3 pages at any given time. Publish the book. We will do this. Create the museum displays. We created a template for a profile. It has the woman's face, her name, her special quote, and then it'll have some interesting facts about her, and then the response to those 2 questions. What would you like the community to remember you by or to remember about you? And then what do you want the public to know about Milwaukie? Really great stuff. A lot of it dealing with, I loved living here, and the other one is, I want people to know it's a great place, and there's a tinge of the, but we don't need any more people. However, the new people coming in, they love their kids, they spend time with them, they care for the environment, and we like that kind of people. So we will prepare the archival material. That's a whole process of its own, because this is an oral history, and the real word is a narrative oral history, which means in their own words, literally in their own words, and it has to be accessible to the public. And that's a whole process you have to go through. But we've been doing that all along. So all of this information will be available. And then collaborate with the Women's History Project. Next slide. When I looked at these slides, I liked them, except that, you know, I'm Latina, half Spaniard and half Aztec, so, you know, classic mestiza. And that looks like an evil eye. So I thought, nah, nobody wants to hear that. So I don't particularly like it, but it was the best I could find. Special thanks to these project participants: Jeanette Baker, Deborah Barnes, Nancy Bauer, Betty Lou Beck, Siri Bernard, Enid Briggs, Carlotta Collette, Peggy Costanzo, Wilda Parks, Carolyn Tomei, Adele Wilder, and Nancy Wittig. Keeping community and making history. That might be the subtitle, because that's what they're doing. Keeping community and making history. And Stella and I would particularly like to acknowledge the following people for their help with this project. David Aschenbrenner, who was at the time that it started, was the chair of the society. Pat Duvall was the board liaison. Greg Hamer, who is currently the book committee chair. Michelle Himmer, who gave us a really good summary of local traditions so that we could use that as background research. Nicole Perry, she was the volunteer that transcribed those. For every hour of interview, there's 7 to 8 hours of transcription. It was something else, and thank goodness for her. Scott and Nicole from the Office of the City Recorder. Thank you all.
Now, you see what you get when you get an applied anthropologist put on a project? We get the huge amount of benefit of it. Every resident here in Milwaukie gets the benefit of that. We cannot thank you, Doctor, and you, Stella, enough for all the hard work that you have put into this. And I want to let everybody know that Stella came all the way from Arlington, Virginia to be here tonight. So, thank you. So Carolyn Tomei moved to Milwaukie in 1966 after an acting and modeling advisory career with her husband and children. To help better connect with their foster children, Ms. Tomei began taking classes at Portland State, which eventually turned into a master's degree in social work. From there, she led various government agency positions, all working and assisting with children and their families. Well, then came the expansion of the poo station, or what some people like to call the waste water system, near her home in Island Station. The rallying of neighbors led to the beginning of her political career, including Milwaukie Planning Commission, elected to City Council in 1996, elected mayor in 1998, and then our state representative from 2000 to 2014. She is still involved with the community today, actively attends the Island Station NDA meetings, is a great supporter and participates in Milwaukie Museum programs like tonight's presentation. But also, Carolyn and I have spent summer nights talking about our visions for Milwaukie. As Dave may say, I was one of the wacky ones. Thank you is not enough for Ms. Tomei's service throughout her life, but thank you. Now, on the other hand, there's her son, Dave Tyler. Nah, just kidding. Dave and I have been friends for years. He has his mother's generosity, gift of gab, and spirit of adventure. Being raised in Milwaukie most of his life, he remembers the days of logs blocking Milwaukie Bay, going to the Gay Blade to buy school clothes, and water skiing on the river. Although recently retired, Dave has not slowed down. You will find him on his kayak looking for lawn art, sailing the Columbia, hanging with his wife Yvonne, talking to people on the street, seeking adventures on his bicycle, still a peddler, not an e-biker, or just plain laughing and telling great stories. Tonight, here to talk about his mother, Carolyn Tomei, is Dave Tyler.
Thank you, Greg. That was a heck of an introduction. Thank you. My name is Dave Tyler, one of many children of Carolyn Tomei, my mother. Now, when I say this, I do not think Mom is in such great shape for having many children. She birthed me, my brother Larry, and my sister Roseanne. But she has fostered so many kids that it is hard to count. She always treated her children as equals, no matter who birthed them. Now, when Greg asked me to do this, I struggled with finding praise. You see, most people you meet, when they find out who my mother is, ask the question, "Aren't you so proud of your mother?" Or, "Your mother is so special, you must be proud." To be honest, Carolyn Tomei, the actress, the social worker, the mayor, the state rep, is just Mom, the person that raised me, the person that still provides unsolicited advice, although my wife Bonnie is a close second. I lost my place. You know, just like every other mother, the accolades and resume she has created in her life did not really mean that much to me, because Mom is just Mom. She does this stuff all the time. It's just the way it is. After high school, instead of going to college, I decided to travel throughout the United States. Just me, my bike, and a friend. I know this sounds a little unsafe today, but back in the late 70s, it was not abnormal to go explore on your own. Well, I did it. Got all the way to the Florida Keys from Milwaukie. The only stipulation was that I called Mom once a week. Collect, of course. For those of you who don't understand the concept of a collect call, you used to pick up the phone at a phone booth, tell the operator it was a collect call. The operator would call the person you would call and ask, "Will you accept the charges from the person calling?" Two things. Yes, back in the day, you had to pay for a call for calling someone out of state, and a phone booth had a phone inside of it that you had to pay with dimes to call someone. Kind of like an arcade game today, but with a telephone. Life before cell phones was so difficult. When I called her, we would talk for hours. One thing about Mom was she always was a good listener. I can't remember all the conversations we had, but I do remember I did most of the talking. Mom would just listen, without judgment, making the time to talk to her son. She did that with everyone, always willing to listen to someone, even if she did not share the same viewpoint. Maybe that is what made her an exceptional politician, her ability to listen and engage even though she may not have agreed. She even set up her own table at the farmer's market to meet her constituents when she was mayor to listen to their concerns. Some concerns I could tell were wacky from Mom's point of view, but she always listened, and when they left, they always felt that their concerns were heard. Back to the Florida Keys story. I made it to the Florida Keys, out of cash and looking for work. I was staying at a campground and found a job working on a boat taking tourists fishing. This gets me to Mom's determination, one of the many reasons why I admire her. Now, because I was out on the fishing boat working, I forgot to call to talk to Mom. Was Mom worried, wondered if I was dead, or just missed listening to me? Not sure, but she was certainly determined to hunt me down. Now, how do you find someone without Google, Facebook, or a cell phone? You need determination. So to find me, Mom did this. Called a friend of mine in Massachusetts. How she knew the number was beyond me, but she had it. My friend in Massachusetts knew the name of the campground I was living at. The girl at the front desk knew me and knew I was on a boat with the Majestic Fishing Fleet. Mom called the campground and got the name and number to the ticket office. Mom then called the office. Lo and behold, the minute I got off the boat, Susie at the ticket counter came to me and said, "You better call your mother." I was shocked, but what was the first thing I did? I called Mom Collect, and we talked for hours without criticism or chastisement. Determination and the feeling of being listened to all rolled into one. Another story of Mom's bravery or craziness is when she jumped out of a perfectly good airplane. Well, it was being held with some duct tape. But anyway, on my nephew's 18th birthday, he wanted to skydive. Now you can do that in one day if you spend a couple of hours getting direction and then jump attached to another person. So Mom thought it would be fun, so she asked my nephew if he minded if she jumped also. What is a kid going to say to a 62-year-old grandma? Sure, go for it. And that's how we had 2 family members risking their lives for fun on that day. And we have pictures to prove it too. She even went so far as to print postcards of her in the air with the caption, "I'll be dropping in on you soon," when she ran for the state legislature. There. Mom was always willing to have fun and laugh at the silly things in life. I remember at the dinner table with Mom and Dad, the fun we would have. I know Mom seems prim and proper, but at home she was a hoot and used sarcasm to make us all laugh. We would stab each other with forks if the elbows were on the table. When someone would say, "Please pass the butter," Dad would retort, "Where do you want it?" and then toss the butter dish. But our favorite game was peeing in Dad's beer. You see, when we had peas for dinner, the big trick was to get a pea inside Dad's beer. Peeing in the beer. That, of course, turned into peeing in someone's mashed potatoes, their milk, and using your imagination, we peed in it. Speaking of Dad, this next story compliments Mom's ability to forgive. Not only has she forgiven me for all my silliness, maybe disappointment, not sure, but for everything I created for her concern, she always forgave. I was in 7th grade when my mom and dad divorced. You know, as a kid, it is always hard to understand the why or what happened, but all I know is that Mom and Dad were not friendly or even on speaking terms. We would all be together for family functions, but Mom and Dad never spoke or really interacted with each other. Until my nephew's first birthday party. Mom was laid up because of knee surgery, but she had to go to the party. We carried her in, set her on a chair, and there she sat. My dad went over to talk to her. We all kind of watched and waited for fireworks, but they had a very pleasant conversation, probably talking about my lack of work and what to do with me. Just kidding. But true, Mom and Dad had a really good vibe that day. The whole family had a really good vibe that day. It was so special to all of us, my brother and sister included. Maybe Mom and Dad had finally buried the hatchet. Mom was willing to forgive that day, which was the last time we all saw my dad. He passed 2 weeks later. We all in the family are so happy it ended with a high note, Mom being the one to initiate the forgiveness. So when people say to me, "Carolyn Tomei is so special, you must be so proud being her son," I truly say, she is just Mom, a good listener, determined, funny, and forgives. That is just my mom. Good job, Rick.
Although you may not recognize her by her name, if you have spent any time at the Wittig Library, you truly recognize her face. Or maybe away from the library, you were told by her you have an overdue book. Nancy Wittig was born in Portland and during the 5th grade moved to Milwaukie. One of her favorite places to go as a child was, of course, the Wittig Library. As a teenager, Miss Wittig worked many places the old-timers will remember. The Whiz Burger, the Victory Theater, and our lovely library. After attending Mount Hood and PSU, Miss Wittig returned to work full-time at the library, where she was employed for 40 years. Miss Wittig believes the library is a bastion of the community, with a myriad of programs, services, books, and digital materials. Miss Wittig supervised a staff of 14 and as many as 100 volunteers a month. She was involved in the 2 editions and the digitizing of library materials. Her last position was circulation supervisor. Not only was she a dedicated public servant, but a volunteer in her son's school and in her church. Today, we know it as Operation Santa Claus, but Miss Wittig started the program originally as a toy and school supply drive. Slide. Joe Sandfort grew up in Northern California and spent his 20s in North Georgia before moving to Oregon in 1979. This is when he met Nancy, both working at the Wittig Library. Mr. Sandfort held a number of jobs during his tenure at the library and was the library director until he retired in 2011. He now lives in Sellwood area and keeps busy by walking around his neighborhood, brewing beer, and taking care of 4 grandkids, plus working in the yard. Here tonight to talk about his former dedicated co-worker and friend, Nancy Wittig, is Joe Sandfort.
I met Nancy Wittig in 1979, and we've been close friends ever since. We both worked at the Ledding Library. Nancy started in 1976, and I in 1979. Through Nancy, her husband Dirk, and their son Andrew, I met her family and friends, and really, in a sense, the entire Milwaukie community. And I was really enriched by this experience. What made Nancy so fun to work with was that she grew up in Milwaukie, knowing its history and most of the local characters. Whenever we had a problematic issue or a person in the community to deal with, Nancy knew what approach to take to solve the problem. So first, I'd like to talk about 4 character traits that make Nancy the person that she is, and made her really the person who was capable of molding the Ledding Library into what became a cultural center and a community hub of the Milwaukie community. Now, first is Nancy's sense of humor. But before I talk about her sense of humor, I have to mention her father, Ed Zumwalt. And even in his 90s, Ed had the quickest wit, the most profane vocabulary, and most nuanced sense of humor of anyone I've ever met. Nancy inherited much of Ed's sense of humor, but I do have to admit that she doesn't swear as much as Ed did, at least around me. Now, one incident illustrating Nancy's sense of humor that I vividly remember happened at closing time at the library, a long time ago. Now, right before the library closed, the staff always had to make sure that there was no public people left in the library, so the staff would walk around and make sure everyone had left so they didn't get locked in the building after the staff had gone. So during the closing walk around, Nancy came upon a somewhat unattractive couple kind of behaving inappropriately behind a shelf of books. And to her credit, Nancy, do you remember this, Nancy? Yeah. to her credit, Nancy politely escorted the couple out of the library, and then with the staff used very colorful language to describe the incident. Now, maybe today that wouldn't have gone over real well, but she concluded her remarks by saying that witnessing this unfortunate scene had removed several years from her lifespan. Now, Nancy's, the second trait that I'd like to talk about is her kindness. My 2 children and I went through a very difficult time in the 1990s. My kid's mom, who was also my wife, was killed in a car accident, and our world was upended. And Nancy immediately provided the 3 of us with an incredible amount of support and unending love. She would literally listen to my troubles for hours and did her best really to bring happiness to my children. Nancy and Dirk invited us to their house for wonderful meals. My children at the time, whose names were Caleb and Kelly, spent sleepovers at the Wittig house, watching movies, especially The Parent Trap. And when the kids got older, several years older, Dirty Rotten Scoundrels, which is one of Nancy's favorites. And during that time in my life, it became very clear to me that Nancy is a wonderfully kind and caring person. And it just wasn't me, or just wasn't I and my family either. She befriended and supported many other people as well, usually during the most difficult times in their lives. And we had a wonderful friend named Marge, for example, whose life was brightened in her later years by Nancy. Nancy's leadership skills are the next trait that I'd like to talk about. As was mentioned earlier, most of Nancy's time at the library is spent directing and supervising other employees, usually, I think, between and sometimes up to 20 people. So when conflicts arose, as they invariably do when dealing with so many personalities, Nancy listened to the parties and issues involved and made decisions, and often they were very creative decisions. And when necessary, she could be very firm too. So what I saw at the library was that Nancy gave the people who reported to her the information, the guidance they needed to succeed. And this, I think, is a really valuable trait for a leader. She developed work schedules for employees so they knew what was expected of them. And she was very good at giving performance evaluations that were telling people, what they did well and how they could improve. And I don't know if many of you remember the 1980s in Milwaukee, the governmental situation, but her effectiveness as a leader was shown by her ability to handle increasing workloads without an increase in staffing numbers. But staff retention was still high, which I think that shows that library workers really believed in Nancy, and also they enjoyed their jobs. Well, in the 1980s, oftentimes, like the city budget, the library budget, would come up for votes, and sometimes we went to bed on a Tuesday night not knowing if we were going to even have jobs in the morning. It was a situation like that at that time. Even during these times, Nancy never wavered from being a strong and a fair leader. And the last trait that I'd like to mention is her courage. The Nancy Wittig that I have known is a courageous person who effectively stands up for others, for herself, and for the issues that she believes in. And one story comes to mind, again, back in the 1980s. The library received a bequest that allows to build a sizable addition. Now, this isn't the old building, not the new one, of course. The one that Florence Letting kind of helped donate the property to the city. So we built an addition with this bequest, and the main floor, I think, became the fiction room, and the basement floor, the bottom floor, became a children's programming area. And believe it or not, during this whole stressful situation, one of the staff's most difficult decisions was the selection of what the new carpeting would look like. Everybody had a different idea about what it should look like, and no one was afraid really to express his or her displeasure with another person's carpet preference. Nancy assessed the situation pretty quickly, had a few pointed conversations with the staff, and the disagreement vanished and the new carpet was installed. So I fully believe that Nancy Wittig has made a positive difference in the Milwaukie community. Her courage and leadership made her a force for meaningful progressive change, and her kindness and humor made this change possible.
Speaking of the Letting Library, this program would not have been possible without their great work. After being closed because of COVID, it is back open again. Check it out Monday through Thursday from 10 a.m. to 8 p.m., Friday and Saturdays 10 a.m. to 6 p.m., and on Sundays noon to 6. Even if you don't want to check out a book, come inside and see the award-winning design. Letting Library was on the cover of the November Library Journal, received a merit award from the American Institute of Architects, and an honorable mention from the International Interior Design Association. Looking for a gift or something for yourself? Go to the Friends Bookstore inside the library and find something for the reader in your life. Check out their website and visit their Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, and Pinterest accounts for library updates, programs, and information. Raised by her single immigrant mother, Elizabeth Chin Start developed a desire to serve and help others. She went on to receive a degree in theology with the plan to live abroad and help others. However, life sometimes has other plans, and her path led her to waste and recycling industry. She saw the gaps in services that were provided to some people and not to others. The gaps were predominantly in communities of color. It was then that her passion to see equitable services for marginalized communities was ignited. She has been a vocal advocate for the waste and recycling industry to provide equitable programs and services, as well as hiring more BIPOC people and women, especially in leadership roles. Ms. Start's career was focused on materials management for the last 20 years. She has had the honor to work for local government, a large waste hauling company, and a wonderful nonprofit, Scrap Creative Reuse. In 2021, she founded Start Consulting Group, LLC, a Milwaukee-based business. The group's goal is to ensure that waste materials management systems include racial equality and sustainability while working towards a more sustainable and environmentally just world. Ms. Start served on Milwaukee's Comprehensive Plan Advisory Committee and now volunteers on Milwaukee's Equity Steering Committee and with Milwaukee Environmental Stewards Group. In Milwaukee and around the metro region, Ms. Start is a master recycler volunteer and collaborates with the Master Recyclers of Color Group. Most recently, she was appointed by the governor to serve on the Oregon Recycling Systems Advisory Council. On a personal note, I work with Liz on both Milwaukee Environmental Stewards Group and with our great Linwood NDA. Her leadership, intelligence, and infectious smile keeps these organizations moving forward, finding ways to champion better service to the community and the environment. Slide. Ms. LeDoux is a lifelong Oregonian who studied fine art at the University of Oregon and has spent the past decade working in creative reuse. As the National Education Program Director for Scrap Creative Reuse, Ms. LeDoux found her passion in combining environmental education and art, introducing creative reuse to the next generation, both locally and nationally, has been her joy. In early days working at Scrap, Ms. LeDoux met Ms. Start while processing donations from the community. They bonded while sorting through the random and sometimes hilarious treasures, like broken baby doll heads, inner workings of piano parts, and vintage family photos, just to name a few. Here is where they discovered their shared passions for sustainability, and after many years of nonprofit work and friendship, Ms. LeDoux is now thrilled to be part of the Start Consulting Group. Here tonight to talk about her friend and co-worker, Elizabeth Chin Start, is Lisa LeDoux.
Good evening. My name is Lisa LeDoux, and I just want to start by saying how grateful I am for this opportunity to talk about my wonderful friend and colleague, Liz. It's given me a chance to reflect on our time together in a way I've really never had a chance to do before, so I've really enjoyed that. So you may or may not know the long list of Liz's professional accomplishments working towards racial equity and environmental sustainability, but I will tell you, it is staggering. She is an absolute powerhouse. However, it is not the resume, it's the human being that she is, the woman that she is, that's the real magic. It's because of who she is as a person that she's able to make real change happen and push the rest of us to take action with her. I first met Liz at Scrap PDX, a creative reuse center, where we bonded while sorting through and processing donations from the community. To some, that may seem like humble beginnings, but to be honest, it was the first time I felt real purpose in the work I was doing. It was incredibly fun to share that time with Liz. To be surrounded by so much passion from like-minded people wanting to serve their community created a real palpable energy. And I look back on that time now and I realize just how much that shaped the next decade of not only our friendship, but our careers. When I tell people about Liz, I find myself gushing. I can't seem to say enough about her wonderful attributes. I describe her as a craft goddess. She's making magic. She's constantly making magic and beauty appear and using what some may refer to as trash. She'll take black rubber bike tire inner tubes and transform them into a stunning sculpture of a raven. She'll weave thousands of aluminum soda can tabs into an elegant evening gown. She might even take a broken baby doll head and turn it into a Christmas tree topper. She is a true original, and her creativity is endless and fascinating for those of us around her to witness. I also describe Liz as a powerful force, and I find her superpower to be radical truth-telling. I use the word radical because this kind of truth-telling is very rare. I don't think it's possible for Liz not to tell the truth, I think she just is going to tell it like it is always. But her honesty is always perfectly balanced with compassion, and that is the recipe for real change. When she speaks truth to power, she makes her community and everyone around her better for it. And often, more often than not, she is speaking up for those who are underrepresented and overlooked in this world. It's challenging for most of us to do that, to speak up and call things out when the time comes. We're afraid of ruffling feathers or what others might think of us. But Liz knows who she is, and I think because of that, she has that confidence, she is bold. And you can always feel when someone's heart is in the right place. And with Liz, you know it's never about ego, it's always about service. I consider Liz to be a mentor as well. As women, we receive damaging messages that we should downplay our accomplishments and take up less space. And Liz is a real model of empowerment and knowing your worth, and that has helped me greatly. She's a risk taker in the best way possible, always pushing herself to try new things and dive in with determination and optimism. And watching her build Start Consulting Group this past year or so has been nothing short of inspiring. She has bet on herself in the most amazing way, and my God, are the odds in her favor. She is already accomplishing great things in such a short amount of time and is a model to those around her to be bold. Yet at the same time, Liz is grounded and ready to roll up her sleeves and do the gritty work, all while being a leader, a boss, an executive. I have watched how much more invested her employees and the people around her are when they see just how much she cares, and how she's willing to work right alongside them and even fight for them when the time comes. She's fought for better pay and better working conditions and is willing to make personal sacrifices to make that happen. She doesn't take being a leader lightly, and I will always go that extra mile. During the early days of the pandemic, when fear was at an all-time high, there was Liz driving around town, desperately trying to buy thermometers and buying food and delivering those to employees' homes who were in need or ill. And I can think of many other difficult circumstances like this, where Liz has rose to the occasion, and she's done so with her usual corny sense of humor. Sorry, Liz. Keeping the rest of us laughing instead of crying. And that's just because that's who she is. This deep connection to people, even to strangers, is a unique quality. We often joke about how strangers will very often approach her and want to tell her their entire life story. They seek her out at an airport terminal or in line at a coffee shop and open up to her in the most surprising ways. I think she admits this invisible energy that people are drawn to, and I think it comes from how deeply she cares about the human experience. The rest of us can sense it, and it shows up in her social justice, environmental, and artwork, or in a random encounter with a stranger. But I have to say, the thing I admire most about my friend is her strong bond with her child. I'm relatively new to motherhood myself, and when I envision my future relationship with my child and what that might look like, I often think of Liz and her son. During these difficult times we're all living through, raising a child is no easy task, and yet Liz is as inspiring as ever in this role, and it's a really beautiful thing to watch. So whether it's for her community or her family, Liz will always show up. And as cliche as it may sound, she is truly one in a million, and I definitely don't take for granted knowing such a special person. Thank you.
Enid Briggs' deep roots in the community begin when her two grandfathers settled in Milwaukie area. In 1879 it was the Burkemeyers, and about 1900 the Briggs came. Both were from Germany. Her mother was born in Milwaukie, her father in Maine. Born on May 3rd, 1925 in her parents' home on Briggs Avenue, her childhood was great and included ice skating and Christmas reunions with their 36 first cousins. She was active in 4-H with a horse, goats, a rabbit, and lots of chickens. During World War II, she was a cadet in the Civil Air Patrol, serving as a spotter, looking for enemy submarines in the Columbia River. She graduated from Milwaukie High School in 1943 and worked at PNC Tool Company, making tools for the Army and Navy for 3 years. Miss Briggs graduated from George Fox University and later Linfield College. She also took classes at Portland State University and studied marine biology at Oregon State University. Her subjects were physical education, biology, and history. Miss Briggs was a mentor to hundreds of students she called her kids, including myself, with whom she stayed in touch. Starting out coaching women's sports at George Fox, she then taught at Napa High School in Astoria, Oregon from 1953 to 1974. She went on to teach at North Clackamas Christian School from 1974 to 1987. During those years, she coached various women's sports, including track, softball, basketball, and volleyball. During retirement, Miss Briggs continued working with children in a foster grandparent program, then volunteered at Bilquist School and worked at Parrot Creek Boys Ranch. Always the educator. While living at Deerfield Village Assisted Living Facility, she taught a weekly nature and history club. Miss Briggs was a charter member and lifelong volunteer of Minthorn Church, which became Milwaukie Covenant Church, including teaching Sunday school for many years. She was very involved in the Milwaukie Garden Club and the Milwaukie Historical Society, serving as a board member, researching the area's churches, collecting artifacts, and volunteering to staff the museum after Madeline Bull passed away. Miss Briggs recently passed away, but not only did she leave a lasting legacy to Milwaukie, but also to all of her kids. Here tonight to talk about Enid Briggs is one of her kids, Linda Carr.
Hi, my name is Linda Carr. I first met Enid at a Milwaukie Garden Club meeting in the fall of 2012. I'd wandered into the club, knowing that I wanted to get involved in the garden community of Milwaukie. Enid was giving a talk on Pacific Northwest native plants using a botanical collection she had accumulated over her lifetime. You should see this book. I actually have it now myself, so I'm not sure what to do with it, but it's beautiful. And Enid had a love of native plants, their uses as a food source, in the landscape, and their beauty. Enid was acting president of the club at that time. She took me under her wing, introduced me to everyone, and her enthusiasm about the club, nature, gardens, and life was infectious. Enid was also involved in the Milwaukie Historical Society. Enid and her sister Adele took over the running of the Historical Society when the curator, Madame Bowl, passed. Enid's research and interest in our community history led to a publishing of several booklets on the farms, churches, and schools of Milwaukie. Enid had researched and was scheduled to give a talk at the museum on the Native Americans here in Clackamas County. She asked me to read the speech at the monthly meeting. Initially, I read it only to help her, and then I became an active participant in the society with Enid's encouragement and mentorship. I know some of Enid's history prior to my meeting her. Her love of teaching and the pupils she called her kids, which I consider one of them. Her volunteer work with Oral Hull Park, a nonprofit sight-impaired organization, which hasn't been come up very often, but it's a beautiful place out in Sandy. And we, as a garden club, participate in taking care of a place called Gardens of Enchantment out there. Clackamas Community College, where a native plant walk is dedicated to her. Enid's participation as a cadet in the Civil Air Patrol, serving as a spotter during World War II, which has already been talked about. And of course, her longtime association with the Milwaukie Garden Club and Milwaukie Historical Society. Enid was a charter member and lifelong volunteer of Minthorn Church. She was a Sunday school teacher. She was also the church's librarian for 30 years. I remember one time going there, she had sorted through about 10 boxes of books, and she was going to donate them to the Friends of the Letting Library. And I have a truck. And so she wanted me to haul them to the library, to the thing. And so I said, okay, no problem. So she kind of stood there. At this time, she was in her 90s. And she kind of stood there and watched. I think that one needs to go there. and that one needs to go there, and that one needs, okay, Enid, I'm doing it as fast as I can. These are boxes of books, they're not light. Anyway, back to the church, she taught in Napa which is near Astoria, for 21 years. And during those years, she would drive over to Milwaukie every Sunday to attend church and teach school, and often with several of her high school students tagging along with her. So every Sunday morning she would show up with all of these kids that could squeeze into her car and come over to church. Enid was enthusiastic about everything she became involved in. Even in her last summer at Deerfield Village, an assisted living facility, she had a garden plot, and she always brought me out every time I visited her to show me what she had growing in her garden plot. Tomatoes always, peas, beans. I'm trying to think of all the other things. It was always, and she wanted me to take some, always, you know. Okay, Enid, I'll take whatever you have. It was great. She organized a nature club, a history club, oversaw the Smokey Bear, this is all the last year of her life, Smokey Bear poster contest through the Oregon State Federation of Garden Clubs, and was always willing to give me advice about being the president of the Milwaukie Garden Club, a position I took over from her. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention the Briggs tool. This was a tool Enid used as a gardener from high school years until the present. The Milwaukie Garden Club had the tool replicated by Red Pig Tools back in 2016. We sold several of the tools at our plant sale in May of 2016, and the funds went to community charities and to a scholarship for a high school graduate who was interested in horticulture, gardening, and the environment. Enid was a dear, dear friend, and I miss her terribly, and she was always an inspiration to all. Thank you.
Now, for those of you who have been keeping score at home, I did totally botch and not introduce Linda. So let me just say this. Linda has been a blessing in disguise for the Milwaukie Museum. She is like the plant expert. She is working on getting our little area backyard certified, and she is introducing all native plants. Not only is that her specialty, but if you ever have an idea or need something done or something, Linda is the first one to walk into that door and say, I will be there to help. And I cannot thank you enough, Linda, for everything that you do. Thank you. So tonight you are seeing this program because of our great partner, Willamette Falls Studio. Willamette Falls Studio's mission is to inspire lifelong learning, advance knowledge, and define communications through digital media technology to educate and strengthen communities. Their professional staff work daily to create media content for local organizations, capture city projects, consult on productions, customize broadcast systems, and provide technical support. The staff at WFS work with all levels of experience in media production. Any residents of the 5 service areas can learn how to be a WFS producer at little to no out-of-pocket cost. All they require is playback of your final project on the public channel. Come in and talk to their staff about how they can help you with your communication needs. Essentially, WFS provides residents with a porthole into their community. Through televised local government, meetings, and community-produced programming, coupled with the training to create and share their views, residents have a unique opportunity to not only access the community's global perspective, but also to help shape it. Slide. I want to thank our guest speakers tonight, Councilor Catherine Hyzy, Dr. Emilia Gonzalez, Stella Tompkins, Dave Tyler, Joe Sandfort, Lisa LeDoux, and Linda Carr. I also really want to thank our subjects of tonight's discussion, Carolyn Tomei, Nancy Wittig, Elizabeth Chinstart, and Enid Briggs. A really heartfelt thanks to Scott Stoffer with the City of Milwaukie, Katie Newell with the Ledding Library, and Melody Ashford of Willamette Falls Studios. Your hard work and willingness to spend hours putting these programs together are very much appreciated. A side note, before we say goodbye tonight. The heroism of everyone featured here tonight is inspiring. Their passions, their beliefs, their volunteerism has made our world a better place. If you are watching tonight, whether your passion is helping youth, shaping government, the library, climate change, racial equity, sustainability, gardening, church, history, or whatever, get involved. Apply for a board or committee position. Join an organization and attend their meetings. Go to Clean Up Park Day. Volunteer at Sunday school. Visit Milwaukie Museum. Or find your own path. Without volunteers and the work they do, we, as a society, lose our sense of connectiveness to our community. Once you connect with the right group, you will be hooked, just like the rest of us. Thank you for tuning in tonight. Soon, Milwaukie Museum will have published Women's History Project, the book, a great gift for anyone in your family. Watch our Facebook page for the announcement when ready. If you want to watch this program again, it will be available on the City of Milwaukie and Milwaukie Heritage YouTube pages. Remember to tune in June 1st for our next Ledding Library lecture series entitled Milwaukee's Historic Homes, A Guide and Tour Towards Preservation. My name is Greg Heemer, Communications Director for Milwaukie Historical Society, saying good night.